I've sort of spoken at different points on agendas and sort of before dinner, after dinner, all of that, but I've never quite been squeezed between an AGM and lunch. So I'm just trying to think about what the, what the sort of the right way to handle that is. But it's rather interesting, I think, to have an agenda where we have this space to reflect a little, having seen the documents, having seen all the sort of the numbers and all of that, and to take a step back and think, actually, what's most important here? Where have we had impact over the last year? Where have we worked towards the long-term well-being of people and the planet, which is, of course, what sits at the heart of the PAS 808 standard around purpose-driven organisations. And I guess that's been the theme of a lot of my work, a lot of my experiences, whether it's as an Olympic rower, whether it's working as a diplomat, whether it's being a parent, whether it's now my work with organisations, is to help us think about what does success look like? I think it's a question that is in our minds throughout our lives. It's a question we think about right growing up, isn't it? What do we need to do to please our parents, to please our teachers? And then we get into the workplace. What do we need to do to please our bosses? And in sport, of course, we have these kind of very obvious measures of success, these round, inanimate objects, piece of metal on a ribbon that is going to bring life, never-ending life fulfillment, apparently. And all of these sort of metrics that get thrown at us. But what I found through my experiences of sport, education, politics, diplomacy, and business is that sometimes our definitions of success can actually constrain us. So we need to think about getting them right, personally, professionally, as a society too, to think very carefully about how we define success. And I enjoyed the sustainability discussion right at the beginning of the morning, which was so very clearly about how do we bring sustainability integrate it into how we think, into how we live, into our interactions. How do we actually define success in a way that has long-term meaning and benefit for us all personally and collectively? The way we define success is what drives our mindset. It drives how we show up each day. It drives how we behave. It drives how we create relationships. It's the meaning behind them. So it's really important. Of course, we've all just had a moment of reflecting on, the ongoing definitions of success for the BSI, and of course how they support the rest of business, organisation, society, to be part of creating success that lasts, that has this positive, longer-term impact. And I found there are certain traps on us, certain things that can kind of hold us back from really exploring what we're capable of. So if we define success in a way that is very short-term and very transient, then that's one trap that usually means we limit what happens as a result. In sport, this is most obviously when we simply define success as crossing the line first. It might seem so obvious. How could it be anything else? And that's what I thought when I started off as an Olympian. And I started off on a 10-year journey of pursuing that medal. But if the framework around it, the meaning behind the medal isn't there, if there's nothing lasting when you step off the podium, it's a really, really empty place to be. And there are all sorts of athletes who attest to that. We hear all the stories. We hear Johnny Wilkinson, who chased the next cap, the next trophy, the next medal, hoping that the joy would come. And in his words, the joy never came. Andre Agassi talked about winning Wimbledon. Let him into this dirty little secret that winning changes nothing. Chris Evert, slightly more optimistically, said winning Wimbledon, the high lasted about a week. But then what? What's the impact? What's actually lasting from this? This is the question for me. It's so critical to our definitions of success. And of course, that leads us into a route of having some sense of a longer-term goal, of a longer-term journey, of a longer-term purpose. In education, of course, we do the same thing, don't we? We trap ourselves into the next set of exams, the grades, the marks. The stress that children now experience is absolutely mad in order to get this piece of paper. And yet with my other hat on, working in leadership development, cultural development, working with leadership teams, the stuff that we learn in school is often no use to us now. We face complex situations that require collaboration, integration in a way we'd never thought of before, innovation about things that we have yet to know about as this organisation pivots itself as well. How much does it matter that we were able to regurgitate something that got us an A grade several years ago? And so we see our education systems lagging behind. Not, of course, in Wales. We had that lovely little dip, those of you who are here at the beginning of the sustainability session, into what Wales are doing, who are really starting to think differently about the education curriculum, about social behaviour, about the way communities are involved in sustainability. And that's what's required of all of us in all our organisations, whether we're involved in business or sport, and in our families, in our extracurricular, in the stuff we do in our kind of personal time as well. That we start to think about the meaning behind what we're doing and the impact we have on others. I love the question about the implementation of standards, because of course, that's actually what matters. How do we measure the impact that these standards have, and how might we implement them better? And so I came up with this concept of moving towards the long win, not defining things by this short-term transient crossing a line first, getting a medal piece, but by actually thinking what's the opportunity for sport or education or business? How could we have a greater impact? Can we make sure that our definitions of success aren't ones that are just imposed by others, but that we have a voice in them as well? And that we keep these definitions very human-based. It's not about a medal, it's not about a profit line. Those things need to be connected to something that has a much greater human impact, that means something over the long term. And so I'd love to see sort of this continuing conversation about what's the human impact of these standards, so that we know what does that look like? What does it feel like? What's the human experience? And how can we start to measure things differently? The long win consists of 3 very simple themes, if you like. It's not prescriptive, it's not tick box, because that doesn't work. It's about clarity, constant learning, and connection. And I use these themes to help us step out of the trap of the next deadline, the next short-term target that seems to be driving our lives, and to make sure we're constantly clarifying what really matters in the long term. What is it that we're not measuring that's also really important? Because that usually takes us back to the human experience that people are having in the course of whatever it is that we do. Clarifying the why, this long-term well-being of planet and people, is the why that sits in the language of the purpose-driven organisation standards piece that's been developed over the last period, and that is such a powerful guide. Just reading that, the language takes us into values and principles, and we have to think. We have to think, and we have to think differently. It's a whole different engagement to when we're ticking off, the targets and filling in the spreadsheets. And the Future Generations Act that was spoken about before in Wales, again, was set very carefully, not to be a sort of prescriptive, you have to do these things, but actually you have to think differently. You have to think of the future generations when you're carrying out and making decisions that you're taking. That is a whole different process that we often haven't learned at school, that we often haven't had developed, but is so critical to us now being able to operate more meaningfully with all the different long-term challenges that face us in all of our different walks of life. So clarity of why and clarity of how, because it's in the how that things really work or don't work. All of the sort of great McKinsey work on change programs, all of the great strategy work that's come out of consulting companies for decades, it all starts off looking great, and then it's implemented by humans. And that's the bit that matters. But do we put as much into that? Do we really understand that process? Do we actually invest in people? Do we set goals around people? Or do we set goals around things that are easily measurable? Metrics have a lot to answer for within how our society has kind of got to this point, and our desire for simple quantitative metrics. Addiction, obsession perhaps with them, that we need to wean ourselves off in order to understand constantly what's the qualitative impact of those numbers. What is it that lasts in people's experiences in the society around us from all the numbers that we love crunching so much? So clarity of why, clarity of how we go about things, to start thinking, how can we start to give a clearer vision of the impact that we want to have? The second C of the long win is around constant learning. And I enjoyed hearing sort of the learning culture piece being kind of so core in what Susan was explaining earlier. Because actually, for me, that's really what life is about, isn't it? It's human progress. It's us all trying to explore what we're capable of, to contribute in some way, personally, collectively. And learning sits at the heart of it. This is something that sport has actually really kind of dived into now, because in order to keep improving performances, in order to try and explore what we're capable of as an athlete, simply success is about optimizing improvement and to be continuing to explore what's possible. And so we found in sports psychology that in order to help us explore what we're capable of, we have to define success in those terms. It is that exploration of what's possible together. It's not winning the medal, because the medal actually might limit us. We might start defining it by what other people have done in the past to win medals. It's short term. What happens after the medal? What happens if I'm injured on that day of the medal? What happens after and what comes next is this constant body of learning. It's all we can do. We also don't learn in a straight line. And there might be times when performance definitely doesn't go, whether it's in a business or an athlete's life. But learning is the constant that can give us resilience, that can give us the creativity we need to manage the challenges ahead. So for me, learning should sit at the heart of our definitions of success. And I'd love to see even more next year at the AGM around actually how have people grown in our organisation, because we know that's the fuel for future performance. So let's really invest in that. Let's put it up front. Let's start kind of gathering information about how we can help people to become better versions of themselves, to work together, to become a higher performing team. Let's get better at putting that even more up front than we've heard it today. Because that, for me, is how we start to optimize what we're capable of. If we're really interested in performance. I hear a lot of performance talk, but then I hear and see things that are about constraining performance. Let's start getting our ambitions around what's possible, not just what's probable. And that really leads us into the third C of connection. It is all about the impact we have on each other that matters. And the thing I loved about being an Olympic rower and about being a diplomat, even though they were really different worlds, one had lots of predictability around, when your race is going to happen and certain things in your life. And the other was really, really messy continually and had never a nice kind of gold medal world peace day and ongoing kind of infinite complexities. But in both those worlds, we really focused on people first. We didn't just tuck it in at the end of the day, let's kind of bond as a crew, maybe sort of Friday afternoon we'll have tea. We did it all the time in the conversations we had, in the feedback we had, in every communication. That was part of our day's success measures. We didn't just measure what was easy to measure in terms of how much weight we lifted, how fast the boat went, the kind of easy, obvious stuff. We also measured it in terms of how well are we communicating. Our mindset, how is that developing and helping us or hindering us? Our recovery, what's that like? Because we'll never get to the Olympics unless we're really investing in our recovery along the way. And our relationships, our collaboration, the bonds that we're building. These were deliberate parts of our training program alongside the kilometres that we rode each day, 3 sessions a day that we would train 7 days a week, most weeks of the year. But we knew we wouldn't be able to reach a peak performance unless these human elements were being developed every single day as well. And in the world of diplomacy, human relationships are our only currency. They are our only way of moving the world forward in some small way. And we would invest in them, we would plan them, we would have goals around building relationships. And, that's where I really saw what a relationship-focused organisation looks like. And although lots of people tell me they're in relationship-focused organisations, people still tend to be organising their days around tasks, around outcomes, on agendas, around the kind of easy measurable stuff. So I challenge us also to start thinking about setting goals around the relationships we want to build each week, but also over the longer term. Because that's actually what we all remember. That's actually what usually has the lasting value for all of us. I can tell you, when Olympic medalists get together, We don't talk about medals. We don't talk about, do you remember the 3 minutes we stood on the podium and how nice it was to hear the national anthem? Or, we don't talk about, do you remember the moment we crossed the line? No, we talk about the stories of the good times, the challenging times, the moments when, the funny times, the adversity, the things that connected us, the things we might have done before a race, often the things that people didn't see, most obviously kind of on when they're watching the TV. The things that go through our minds during a race, which is not about, oh, I'm in first, second, and third. That's what the commentators talk about. But we're thinking about our motivations. We're connecting with each other. Yes, we're focusing on, making sure we deliver and execute to the best of our possible ability, the technique that's demands that we've been training each day. But we're also there to kind of just explore what's possible together. I went on this journey over 10 years in sport and thought that was the only place obsessed with winning. But I found a lot of other places since obsessed with winning. But in my first Olympics, I came 7th. And at that point, I was kind of just buying into all of this. It's all about the medal. It's all about who works hardest. It's all about the physical side of it. And after absolutely focusing in on that easily measurable stuff, the miles, doing extra mileage, being there, being the last person standing, I went to the next Olympics and came 9th. And that was probably one of the hardest, but also one of the most liberating moments in my life, because I realized I'd got a lot of things wrong. I'd got this concept of performance wrong. I'd had a miserable time along the way. I felt myself somehow tied up in this, my identity, that I hadn't got this, that I was a failure. I fell into all of those traps that actually society sets us up to fall into. But that was the beginning of a journey of redefining how success in sport could be different, how I might have a different experience if I had one more go. When I went back I had a year off, but I decided I'd have one more go at the Olympics. I thought, it's got to be a different experience, because I could come 9th again. There's no guarantee. I might come 10th, might come 11th. And I know good people come 9th, 10th, and 11th. I know people who try really, really hard and have a decent amount of talent. It can happen to them. So how do I make this different? And the sports psychologist said to me, he said, what are you going to gain from this if you don't win a medal? I thought, my God, don't let anyone listen to that conversation, because we still can't talk about that sort of thing. And he said, bear with me. Let's just think about it, because the odds aren't great. So far you haven't. And actually, the odds on the best people are winning are terrible. You'd never put money on it, because there's so much that you can't control. So let's just think about it for the moment. And it just unlocked this kind of lovely place of exploration, of thinking about what else will I gain, of the depth and the sort of breadth of possibility in really starting to understand who I was beyond sport, in developing my mindset, in developing meaningful relationships, in really understanding and connecting with the people that I was training with, and the huge sort of support network around us, of starting to think differently about what success looked like on a daily basis, the improvement, the learning, the gains, this sort of mastery mindset, and to thinking about how can we together create a different experience that will enable us to say, yeah, we really explored what we were capable of. Every day, of course, we trained as hard. No one's saying this is going to be easy, but the emphasis was different at the end of the day. The things we valued, the things we reviewed, the things we would kind of discuss and improve were about some of these human elements as much as they were about the physical data and the biomechanics data from that day. The experience changed. Our joy changed. What I looked forward to each day was so much greater, because now I was thinking, how am I going to improve the next day? And I know my coach is telling me these are the things we're working on. Whereas before we just got beaten up against where you were in the rankings each day, which kind of leaves us feeling cold. So rethink the metrics. Rethink how we go about what we do. Rethink why we're doing what we do. And go on this journey that actually, if we can think a little bit differently about the long-term well-being of the people and the planet, then we might actually get closer to exploring what's possible together. And I wish you all the best of luck in exploring your own long-win journeys. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was really inspiring, actually, and I feel so much of it. We've talked about in BSI. We talk about it. We talk about people and the connections, and then the day job comes in, and it's difficult, and we try to help our people. But what are the barriers? When you go into companies, what's the first problem that you see? You know, you inspire them with this idea. It's of course it's the right idea, but.
So this is the day job.
Yeah.
And actually, if it isn't the day job,
yeah,
we're not kind of on that route yet. It's about having that clear vision. Again, we talked about in that kind of earlier place. It's talked about in the purpose-driven organisations standard. And then it's integrating it. So as soon as it feels extra, nobody's got time for extra. But this is the core. How could we have got distracted from it? So, you know, our conversations need to focus around this. The way we do things, the reviewing, you know, the metrics are what often pull us to the short term and to the superficial because it's easier to measure. So we have to challenge ourselves to think more qualitatively. And that requires us to listen, to get different feedback, but then the connection is so very much powerful and the potential impact.
Do you think it's more difficult in a world where people are working from home, they're doing it on Zoom or Teams or something? How do they make, especially young people, I feel, who haven't built up the connections in the organisation, and what do we do about it? Do we try and get everybody back together, or can you do these things remotely?
So, I mean, purely remotely, it's hard. I think hybrid, you know, I don't think there's a kind of a rule. I think it's more about how we approach things. So even when we're communicating, you know, through you know, online, it's still possible for us to make that a more human communication. Right, how we frame it, how we start off. Yeah. I mean, actually, there are certain ways it's easier for more people to speak online at the same time than it is when you're sitting around a room. So there are certain things in those tools that could help us that we often don't maximise. But of course, it's still not the same quality as in person. But are we really looking at how we could have a more effective meeting? I find most people just go in and do the agenda without saying, well, how do we make this meeting more effective next time? What are we getting out of it? We spend so much time, you know, and actually, if we're interested in high performance, we would want to review and improve things. So it's bringing that improvement into the how, into the experience. And then I think we could improve both online and in-person experiences.
Thank you. You and I are between us and lunch, but I just got one last point, because this time of year we try to have more younger professionals in the room. And if you were starting out again, what would you say to the young professionals who are they're going for that medal? You would say, find an organisation who will look after you and understand this, or can you do it? Can they bring it to themselves?
You know, I'd say, why do you want the medal?
Why do you want the medal?
You know, what's the meaning? What's the medal going to bring you? What lasts beyond the medal? There's no guarantee of the medal. You know, why are we defining success in this sort of short way? What's actually that medal going to represent that has a lasting value for you? Because that's actually will both help you get towards it, but it will help you afterwards as well.
Super. Cath, thank you so much. We're going to move on. Thank you. Really super. Thank you very much. Really great. Really great. Thank you.